1 inch. That's all that separated life from a bullet to the skull. On a frozen Roman morning in 1943, a white line appeared across the cobblestones of St. Peter's Square. Tourists would have walked right over it. But for the man staring at it from behind, it was the most dangerous border on the planet. On one side, 10,000 SS stormtroopers, a network of Gestapo spies, machine guns, tanks, and orders from Berlin to torch the city. On the other side, one man, no gun, no army, not even a knife, just a 6'2" Irish priest with a prayer book and enough adrenaline to kill a horse. The Nazi commander had screamed in his face, spat at his feet, and promised murder. He'd aimed his Luger at the priest's chest and growled, "1 inch outside this square, and I'll have you shot on sight." Most men would have barricaded themselves in the basement. Most would have prayed for rescue. But Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty wasn't waiting for miracles. He checked his watch. He had somewhere to be, and he was going to walk straight through them to get there. This isn't a story about religion. This is the greatest cat-and-mouse game of World War II. How one amateur spy humiliated the Third Reich using disguises, forgery, and steel nerves. They called him the Scarlet Pimpernel of the Vatican. But to the Nazis, he was the ghost they couldn't catch. To understand how a priest became Rome's most wanted man, you need to meet the monster hunting him. Every great story needs a villain. Rome in 1943 had the worst imaginable. His name was Herbert Kappler. Kappler wasn't your screaming movie Nazi. He was worse, quiet, educated. He treated murder like mathematics. When Germany occupied Rome in September 1943, Kappler set up shop at a building on Via Tasso. Remember that name? 80 years later, Romans still whisper it. It was a beautiful apartment building that Kappler turned into a slaughterhouse. He bricked up the windows so prisoners couldn't tell day from night. He kept blinding lights on 24/7 to shatter their minds. Locals crossed the street because the screaming never stopped. Kappler's job was simple: scrub Rome clean, find the Jews, find the escaped Allied prisoners, find the resistance, erase them all. And for the first few weeks, it worked. The SS was efficient, terrifying. Rome was paralyzed. But inside the Vatican, life was comfortable. Hugh O'Flaherty was 45, a senior diplomat who loved boxing and played golf every morning. He dined with cardinals every night. He was safe. As long as he stayed inside those walls, the war was just newspaper headlines. He could have ignored the screams from Via Tasso. He could have just been a priest. But O'Flaherty had a problem. He couldn't sit still. Before the occupation, he'd spent years visiting POW camps across Italy, bringing books, chocolates, letters from home to British and American soldiers locked up by Mussolini. He knew these men, their names, their wives' names, their favorite soccer teams. When Italy surrendered and Germany took over, those camps dissolved into chaos. Thousands of Allied soldiers, British pilots, American infantry, South African gunners escaped into the countryside with no food, no maps, no weapons. And they were heading to the only safe place they knew: Rome. They started showing up at the Vatican gates at night, starving, bleeding, terrified. They asked for the big Irishman. They asked for O'Flaherty. This was the moment, the turning point. Official Vatican policy was strict: stay neutral, do not provoke the Germans. Helping escaped prisoners was an act of war. If O'Flaherty helped them, he wasn't just breaking German law. He was risking the neutrality of the entire Catholic Church. He went to his room, paced the floor, looked out at German patrols marching below. He knew that opening that door meant no going back. You don't dabble in resistance. You're either in or you're out. O'Flaherty opened the door. He didn't start with a grand plan. He started with an apartment. Used his own money to rent a small flat outside the Vatican walls. He smuggled 3 British soldiers past the Swiss guards and hid them there, then bought them civilian clothes, then forged some ID papers. Amateur hour, making it up as he went. But it worked. 3 soldiers became 10, 10 became 20. By October, the stream had turned into a flood. And then came the date that changed everything. October 16th, 1943. The sun had barely risen when the trucks arrived. Kappler made his move on the Jewish ghetto, a raid designed for maximum terror. The SS went door to door, dragging families from their beds, babies, grandmothers. They loaded over 1,000 people onto trucks parked by the ancient ruins. O'Flaherty watched it happen, saw the brutality, saw the indifference, and saw something else, the silence of the world. No army came. The Vatican stayed silent to protect neutrality. The Allies were bogged down hundreds of miles south. That morning, the amateur stopped playing games. The golfer disappeared. The spy was born. O'Flaherty realized he couldn't do this alone. He needed an organization, a network, and he built one of the strangest teams in espionage history. He didn't recruit soldiers. He recruited people nobody looked at twice. His right-hand woman was Delia Murphy, wife of the Irish ambassador, a famous singer who threw lavish parties that Nazi officers loved attending. She'd pour them champagne, sing Irish folk songs, and while they were distracted, stuff forged documents into her handbag to smuggle across the city. He recruited a Maltese widow named Henrietta Chevalier. She had 6 children and a small apartment. When O'Flaherty asked if she could hide 2 refugees, she said no. She said, "Send me 4. By month's end, she was hiding so many men. They slept in the bathtub and on the kitchen floor. He recruited a Vatican cleaning boy as his messenger, a Swiss count, 2 young priests from New Zealand. Together, they created the Rome escape line. It sounds like a movie. It operated like one. They didn't just hide people, they erased them. Set up safe houses all over Rome, convents, brothels, private apartments, even next door to SS barracks. O'Flaherty realized the safest hiding place was often right under the enemy's nose. But hiding people requires money. Lots of it. Black market food, bribes, rent. O'Flaherty was a priest with a salary of 0. So he pulled off the first modern banking hack. He discovered that wealthy British and American expats in Rome had money stuck in Italian banks that Nazis were threatening to confiscate. O'Flaherty made them a deal. "Sign your money over now. I'll use it to save lives. After the war, the British government will repay you with interest." It was a loan based on nothing but his handshake. Millions of lira started flowing into his pockets. By November 1943, O'Flaherty wasn't just running a rescue operation. He was running a shadow government. 3,000 people under his protection. He kept a ledger, a literal book, with every single name, location, and amount needed. Think about that. He kept a written list in occupied Rome. If the SS ever found that book, it was a death sentence for 3,000 people. The most dangerous object in the city. O'Flaherty carried it in his pocket every day, slept with it under his pillow. Reckless, insane. But O'Flaherty was confident. He didn't think he'd get caught. Herbert Kappler was not an idiot. You can't buy thousands of pounds of bread on the black market without someone noticing. Can't rent 60 apartments without questions. Kappler started seeing the pattern. Allied pilots shot down near Rome, vanishing before his patrols could catch them. Jews scheduled for deportation, disappearing an hour before the trucks arrived. Kappler activated his spy network. Informants everywhere, waiters, taxi drivers, angry neighbors. And all the whispers led back to one place, the Vatican. One name, O'Flaherty. The game changed instantly. Kappler didn't just want to stop the operation, he wanted to crush it. He ordered 24/7 surveillance on O'Flaherty. This is where the story turns into a thriller. O'Flaherty knew he was being followed. He'd leave the Vatican to visit a safe house and spot the man in the trench coat reading a newspaper on the corner. A lesser man would have turned back. O'Flaherty treated it like a sport. He started wearing disguises. Not good ones. Theater disguises. One afternoon he needed to deliver money to a safe house across the river. The SS had checkpoints on every bridge, looking for a tall Irish priest. So O'Flaherty went to the Vatican heating plant, found a coal sack, smeared soot all over his face and hands, put on a ragged workman's jacket and flat cap, slouched his shoulders to hide his 6'2" frame. He walked out of the Vatican gates, right past German sentries, past the SS checkpoint, all the way to the safe house, delivered the money, and walked back. On his way, he passed 2 Gestapo agents actively looking for him. He tipped his cap to them. They looked right through him. Just another dirty Roman laborer. He got back to his room, washed off the coal, put on his robes, and went to evening prayer. Another time, postman. Another time, dressed as a nun. Imagine a 6'2" man trying to walk convincingly in a nun's habit. It shouldn't have worked. But O'Flaherty had something better than any disguise, sheer audacity. He walked with such confidence nobody dared question him. Kappler was getting frustrated. Most feared man in Italy, humiliated by a priest in a coal sack. Kappler decided to escalate. He couldn't arrest O'Flaherty inside the Vatican. Diplomatic neutrality laws. Storming the Vatican would cause global uprising. Hitler didn't want that. So Kappler decided to drag O'Flaherty out. He started raiding the safe houses. Didn't just arrest the people hiding, arrested the Italian families helping them, tortured them at Via Tasso, wanted them to give up O'Flaherty, wanted proof, a signature, a witness. Anything linking the priest to the resistance. The pressure was immense. Every time O'Flaherty went out, he risked not just his life, but everyone he visited. One night, the inevitable happened. The luck ran out. O'Flaherty was visiting a safe house owned by Prince Doria Pamphilj, a palace filled with hidden rooms. He was in the basement delivering supplies when the front door smashed open. "Gestapo! Nobody move!" A raid. O'Flaherty was trapped. Heavy boots of SS running across marble floors above, checking every room, coming down the stairs, no back exit, no secret tunnel. O'Flaherty looked around the basement. A coal cellar, a small chute used to dump coal from street level. Narrow, filthy, steep. The footsteps got louder. German commands echoing. O'Flaherty grabbed the edge of the coal chute and pulled himself up. Dragged his 6-foot frame through black dust, scraping skin, tearing clothes. He heard the basement door kicked open below. He burst onto the street, covered in coal dust, gasping. But he wasn't safe. He was on the street in the middle of a raid, surrounded by SS trucks. A German soldier turned and saw him, a tall, dark figure rising from the ground. O'Flaherty didn't run. If he ran, they'd shoot. He dusted off his jacket, stood to full height, and walked calmly toward a group of Italian civilians watching the raid. Started speaking Italian to them, blending in, acting like a curious bystander. The German soldier hesitated. In that split second, a car pulled up, one of the network drivers. O'Flaherty jumped in. The car screeched away just as bullets started flying. He'd survived. Barely. That night, Kappler snapped. He couldn't catch this man with raids, couldn't catch him with spies. He needed to make it personal. This brings us back to the white line. Kappler ordered his men to paint a white line across the opening of St. Peter's Square, marking the exact boundary of Vatican sovereignty. He stationed 2 snipers on rooftops opposite the square, a squad of Gestapo agents at cafes on the border. He sent a message to O'Flaherty, not coded. Public declaration. The next time you cross this line, You're a dead man. I will not arrest you. I will not interrogate you. I will kill you on the pavement." The chessboard was set. O'Flaherty was trapped inside the Vatican, his network outside, desperate for leadership, money running out, food running out. Kapler sat in his office at Via Tasso and smiled. He'd finally won, boxed the priest in. All he had to do was wait for O'Flaherty to starve or give up. But Kapler made a critical miscalculation. He thought O'Flaherty was playing defense, thought the priest was trying to survive. He was wrong. O'Flaherty was playing offense. And while Kapler watched the white line, O'Flaherty was already digging a tunnel underneath it. The priest wasn't done. The war was about to get bloodier. Kapler had drawn his line in the sand, literally, a white stripe of paint separating safety from death. He expected O'Flaherty to cower inside the Vatican, paralyzed by sniper scopes trained on the square. But Kapler forgot one thing. You can trap a body, but you can't trap a reputation. Every evening, just as the sun set, the doors of St. Peter's Basilica would open. Out would walk Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty. He wouldn't run, wouldn't hide, would walk casually down the steps, smoking his pipe, and stop exactly 1 inch from the white line. Stand there for an hour, just standing, smoking, looking directly at the Gestapo agents across the street. He'd wave at them, smile, the ultimate power move. "I am here, I am still working, and there's nothing you can do about it." The Nazis were furious, gripped their submachine guns, knuckles white, waiting for him to slip, waiting for a toe to cross the line. But he never slipped. O'Flaherty wasn't just taunting them, he was using himself as bait. While the entire Gestapo force stared at him on the steps, his couriers slipped out the back exits of the Vatican, carrying money and maps to safe houses. He was the distraction. But a distraction doesn't feed 4,000 people. By January 1944, the situation was catastrophic. Winter, freezing, Rome was starving, Germans seizing all food for their troops, black market flour prices up 500%. O'Flaherty had thousands of escaped prisoners hiding in cellars and attics across the city. They were eating rats, boiling leather belts to make soup. If they didn't get real food within days, they'd be forced to surrender just to eat. O'Flaherty needed a supply chain. But you can't smuggle tons of food through a war zone without trucks. And he didn't have trucks. So we pulled off Mission Haystack. He contacted sympathetic Italian farmers outside the city. Arranged for carts to come into Rome daily, ostensibly delivering hay for horses. German sentries at checkpoints would poke the hay with bayonets, find nothing, wave them through. They didn't poke deep enough. Inside the center of every hay bale, sacks of potatoes, wheels of cheese, dried meat. Once inside the city, hay delivered to innocent-looking locations, a flower shop, a bakery, a convent. From there, O'Flaherty's network of street kids, as young as 10, would run the food to safe houses in backpacks. A logistical masterpiece. O'Flaherty was running a supply operation rivaling the U.S. Army, from a small desk inside a neutral church. But food wasn't the only problem. The network was bleeding money. Bribes to German guards, expensive. Rent for 60 apartments, expensive. O'Flaherty's loan scheme with wealthy expats was drying up. He needed cash. Fast. This brings us to the golf course drop. Remember, O'Flaherty was a golfer. Before the war, he played religiously. Now trapped inside the Vatican, he couldn't play, but he knew people who did. He got a message to the British ambassador. He needed gold. The British government agreed. But how do you get British gold into Nazi-occupied Rome? Diplomatic cars. A car with diplomatic plates would drive past a specific location near the Vatican walls. Window rolls down, heavy box tossed into bushes. Minutes later, a gardener, Actually, one of O'Flaherty's Irish priests rakes leaves in that area, scoops up the box, walks back inside. Inside those boxes, gold sovereigns and American dollars. O'Flaherty became the bagman, divided money into envelopes, handed them to his runners. But the stress was taking its toll. Look at photos of O'Flaherty from 1943 versus 1944. In 43, young, vibrant. By 44, sunken eyes, lost weight, wasn't sleeping, keeping details of 4,000 lives in his head because writing them down was too dangerous. And then the nightmare scenario happened. The network cracked. It started with a simple mistake. One of O'Flaherty's key couriers, a young Italian man, was stopped at a random checkpoint. He looked nervous. Soldiers searched him, found a list of addresses in his shoe. They didn't execute him on the street. That would have been mercy. They took him to Via Tasso. Kapler went to work. We don't know exactly what happened in that basement, but we know Kapler's methods. Pulling fingernails, breaking fingers one by one, simulated drowning. After 3 days of hell, the courier broke, gave up a location, the raid on the seminary. It was a safe house hiding 12 Jewish refugees and 3 British pilots. The SS hit it at 3 a.m., kicked down doors with such force the frame shattered. Dragged everyone out. Men beaten unconscious in the street, women thrown into trucks. When O'Flaherty heard the news the next morning, he collapsed into a chair. 15 people gone. He blamed himself, felt every blow, every scream. But he didn't have time to grieve, because Kapler wasn't done. Kapler realized torturing couriers was too slow. He needed to cut the head off the snake. He needed O'Flaherty. And since the priest wouldn't cross the white line, Kapler decided to drag him across it. The assassination attempt. It was a bold, almost suicidal plan. Kapler sent 4 men dressed in civilian clothes to St. Peter's Basilica, armed with concealed knives and pistols. Orders: wait for O'Flaherty to come down for evening prayer. Grab him, drag him through the church, out the door, throw him into a waiting car across the line. If anyone tries to stop them, shoot to kill. A kidnapping operation inside the holiest building on earth. O'Flaherty was walking down the nave heading toward the altar. Church dim, lit only by candles. He saw 4 men standing near a pillar. They didn't look like pilgrims, standing too stiffly, hands inside their coats. O'Flaherty's instincts screamed danger. He was halfway to them. If he turned and ran, they'd chase and shoot him in the back. If he kept walking, they'd grab him. He did the only thing they didn't expect. He marched straight toward them, but at the last second veered left toward a group of Swiss guards standing by a side exit. Swiss guards carry halberds, those medieval axe spears, but they also carry hidden pistols. O'Flaherty stood right next to the guards and started a loud conversation, pointing at the 4 men. The hit squad froze, realized they'd lost the element of surprise. Attacking a priest surrounded by armed Swiss guards would turn into a massacre they couldn't win. They glared at O'Flaherty. He glared back. Slowly they backed away and disappeared into the shadows. He'd survived again, but the net was tightening. And then came the darkness. March 23rd, 1944. The darkest day in Rome's history. Italian partisans attacked a column of SS soldiers marching through the city, set off a bomb. 33 German soldiers killed. Hitler was furious. Sent a direct order from Berlin. I want 10 Italians dead for every German killed. Execute them immediately. 10 for 1. 330 people. Kapler needed bodies, emptied the jails, took political prisoners, Jews awaiting deportation, random civilians off the street, gathered 335 men and boys, 5 more than ordered, just to be sure. Drove them to the Ardeatine Caves, a network of tunnels outside the city. Marched them inside in groups of 5, made them kneel. and then he and his officers shot them in the back of the head, one by one, for hours. When it was over, they blew up the entrance to seal the bodies inside. O'Flaherty heard the explosion from his room, didn't know what it was at first. But when the news filtered in, it broke something inside him. This wasn't a game anymore. Wasn't a spy thriller with disguises and chases. It was mass murder. Among the dead, friends of his, people who'd helped the network, people he'd promised to protect. Kapler sent a message to the Vatican the next day, a list of the dead. It was a threat. This is what happens when you resist. You are next. Most men would have quit, would have said the price is too high. O'Flaherty read the list, cried, then stood up and wiped his face. "We don't stop," he told his team. "We double down." He realized Rome was about to fall. The Allies were fighting their way up the coast. Battle of Anzio raging just 30 miles away. Germans knew they were losing, and a losing army is a dangerous army. Kapler was preparing for the final solution of Rome. Before the Germans retreated, they planned to execute every remaining prisoner and destroy the city's bridges and dams. O'Flaherty had 4,000 people hiding. If the Germans decided to burn the city on their way out, those 4,000 were sitting ducks. He needed a master plan, needed to transition from hiding to fighting. He sent word to the safe houses. "Arm yourselves." Controversial order, a priest telling civilians to pick up guns. But O'Flaherty knew that when the end came, prayers wouldn't stop bullets. He used his remaining gold to buy weapons on the black market. Rifles, grenades, stolen German Lugers. The network began transforming into a militia. April turned to May. Sound of artillery got closer. You could hear American cannons in the distance. Vatican windows rattled with every explosion. Kapler was getting desperate. Knew his time was running out. He had one final card to play. He couldn't catch O'Flaherty. So he decided to destroy his reputation. He started a propaganda campaign, planted stories that O'Flaherty was a British spy stealing money from the church, forged documents showing him with prostitutes, tried to get the Pope to fire him. But Pope Pius X, who'd been so cautious, so silent, finally made a move. When the German ambassador demanded O'Flaherty be arrested, the Pope simply said, "We have no knowledge of any illegal activities." It was a lie, a holy lie. But it bought O'Flaherty time. June 3rd, 1944. The rumble of tanks was audible now, Americans on the outskirts. Inside Via Tasso, Kapler was burning documents. Smoke poured from chimneys. He was preparing to flee. But he had one last order to give, the purge. He commanded his remaining SS units to sweep the city one last time. Kill everyone in the safe houses. Leave no witnesses. 6:02 p.m. Sun setting. Germans had 12 hours before they had to retreat. 12 hours to slaughter 4,000 people. O'Flaherty got the call. "They're coming. For everyone." He looked at the white line. Looked at the chaos in the streets. This was it. The final stand. He grabbed his cloak, grabbed his ledger, and for the first time in months, he didn't stop at the line. He stepped over it. June 3rd, 1944, 7 p.m. The sun was dying over Rome. So was the Third Reich. Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty stepped over the white line, didn't look back, climbed into a battered Fiat Topolino, driven by one of his teenage runners. Engine sputtered, roared to life. They sped into the darkness. This was no longer a Cold War. It was a race. German army retreating north. But SS death squads stayed behind with a single mission. Scorched earth, burn the files, destroy the bridges, eliminate the witnesses. O'Flaherty had a list in his head. 60 safe houses, 4,000 lives. He had 12 hours to make sure doors were locked, lights out, weapons ready. The city was chaos. German tanks grinding through streets, retreating. trucks loaded with stolen Italian art speeding north. Amidst this mechanical stampede, O'Flaherty's little Fiat wove through back alleys. He hit the first safe house, banged on the door. "Stay down," he told them. "Don't open this door for anyone but an American. If the Germans knock, shoot through the wood." Hit the second house, third. At the fourth, a convent near the Colosseum, he arrived just as a German patrol truck pulled up. O'Flaherty dove into the shadows of a doorway, watched as 4 SS soldiers jumped out, rifles raised. Looking for loot, wine, anyone to kill for sport. O'Flaherty was unarmed, but he knew something about the German army they'd forgotten in their panic. They were terrified of rank. He stepped out of the shadows, wasn't wearing his coal merchant disguise, was wearing his full Monsignor robes, red sash cutting through the gloom. He walked straight up to the German sergeant, spoke in perfect German, didn't ask what they were doing. He screamed at them. "Is this how the Wehrmacht conducts itself?" he roared. "You're delaying the retreat. The Americans are 2 miles away. You want to be captured looting a nunnery." The sergeant froze, saw the robes, saw the confidence, looked at his men, looked back at the crazy Irish priest. "Move out," the sergeant yelled. They jumped back into the truck and sped away. O'Flaherty didn't wait to exhale, got back in his car. "Next house," he said. All night, the Scarlet Pimpernel ghosted through the city, dodged checkpoints, hid under bridges while Tiger tanks rumbled overhead. He was the shepherd making sure the wolves didn't get in before sunrise. June 4th, dawn. A low rumble shook the ground. Not artillery. Deeper, heavy engines. O'Flaherty was on the roof of the Vatican College, raised his binoculars, looked south toward the Appian Way. And then he saw it, a white star painted on olive-drab steel. The Americans. General Mark Clark's Fifth Army rolled into Rome. First Axis capital to fall. Crowds poured into the streets, people crying, kissing tank treads, throwing flowers at dusty American GIs. For the first time in 9 months, windows of Via Tasso were thrown open. Prisoners inside, the ones who hadn't been executed, stumbled out into sunlight, blinking, skeletons walking among the living. But while Rome celebrated, O'Flaherty went to work. He didn't drink champagne, went to the Colosseum where hundreds of refugees emerged from hiding, started organizing food trucks, started reconnecting families, and then asked the question everyone wanted to know. Where is Kappler? Herbert Kappler had fled hours before the Americans arrived, took his files, his gold, his hatred, and vanished north. The war in Europe dragged on another year. O'Flaherty stayed in Rome, rebuilding what the Nazis broke. He was hailed as a hero. British gave him the CBE. Americans gave him the Medal of Freedom. But O'Flaherty didn't care about medals, put them in a drawer and went back to playing golf. But justice has a long memory. In 1945, British Special Forces tracked Kappler down. He was arrested and put on trial for war crimes, specifically the Ardeatine Caves massacre. The 335 innocent men he murdered in cold blood. The trial was a sensation. The world saw the monster of Rome in a cage. He sat there stone-faced, arrogant, unrepentant. Claimed he was just following orders. The court didn't buy it. He was sentenced to life in prison, no parole. Sent to Gaeta prison, a fortress on the Italian coast. The story should end there. Hero wins. Villain rots in a cell, credits roll. But Hugh O'Flaherty wasn't done. He'd defeated Kappler tactically, defeated him militarily, but he hadn't defeated him spiritually. One morning in 1947, a car pulled up to the gates of Gaeta prison. A tall priest got out, walked up to the warden. "I'm here to see a prisoner," he said. "Which one?" the warden asked. "Herbert Kappler." The warden thought it was a joke. Why would the man Kappler tried to kill want to visit him? Was he there to gloat, to spit in his face? to watch him suffer. O'Flaherty walked down the long stone corridor. Guard unlocked the heavy iron door. Kapler looked up from his cot, saw the man he'd hunted for 2 years, the man he'd set traps for, the man he'd hated more than anyone on earth. O'Flaherty didn't scream, didn't preach. He sat down on the stool. "Hello, Herbert," he said. For the next 10 years, O'Flaherty visited Kapler every single month. Think about the discipline that takes. It's easy to pull a trigger in battle, easy to hate your enemy. But to get in a car, drive 4 hours, and sit in a cold cell with the man who murdered your friends, that isn't just hard, it's almost impossible. At first, Kapler wouldn't talk, sat in silence, staring at the wall, still a Nazi, still believed he was the master race. But O'Flaherty kept coming, brought him books, tobacco, talked about literature, about Ireland, about the weather. He treated the monster like a man, year after year, water dripping on stone. Kapler began to crack, not under torture, but under kindness. He couldn't understand it. "Why?" he asked one day. "Why do you come here? I tried to kill you. I killed your friends." O'Flaherty looked at him. "My God says I have to love my neighbor." He didn't say it would be easy. The conversations got deeper. They talked about guilt, about the 335 bodies in the caves, about the soul. O'Flaherty was performing the longest exorcism in history, trying to pull the Nazi out of the man. 1959, 12 years after the visits began, Kapler asked for a priest, not just any priest. He asked for O'Flaherty. In that small, damp prison cell, the former SS colonel, the butcher of Rome, knelt on the concrete floor, bowed his head, and asked to be baptized into the Catholic Church. Hugh O'Flaherty poured holy water over the head of his enemy, washed away the SS officer, washed away the hatred. When O'Flaherty walked out of the prison that day, he looked tired. Old now, hair white. His stroke was only a year away. A reporter once asked him, "How could you forgive him? How could you forgive a monster?" O'Flaherty smiled, that same smile he used to give the Gestapo agents at the White Line. "He isn't a monster," O'Flaherty said. "He's just a man who got lost, and it's a priest's job to find lost things." Hugh O'Flaherty died in 1963. He died peacefully in his sister's garden in Ireland, far from the screams of Via Tasso. He didn't have a state funeral, didn't have millions of dollars. But when he died, 6,500 families around the world stopped and prayed. Today, if you go to St. Peter's Square, you won't find the White Line. It's been scrubbed away by time and millions of tourists' footsteps. But if you look closely near the German cemetery inside the Vatican, you'll find a small plaque. And in the Yad Vashem Memorial in Israel, you'll find a tree planted in his name, the righteous among the nations. So the next time you think one person can't make a difference, the next time you think the system is too big, the enemy too strong, the evil too deep, remember the Irish priest in the coal merchant's hat. Remember the man who stood 1 inch from death and refused to blink. Remember that the greatest weapon against darkness isn't a gun, isn't a tank, isn't even a plan. It's the courage to open the door when the devil knocks and say, "Not today." This was the story of Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty, the man who didn't just save 6,500 lives, he saved 6,501. If this story moved you, if you believe courage deserves to be remembered, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because history is full of ghosts waiting to speak, and we're going to tell their stories.